This is your reality check.
Hi everyone, and welcome to The Reality Check, the Canadian show that explores a wide range of controversies and curiosities using science and critical thinking. I'm your host, Darren McKee, and with me, as usual, is Adam Gardner.
What's up, cuboids?
We have a great show for you today. Adam is going to explore whether there's a mysterious megastructure underneath the Great Pyramid of Giza.
That's right.
But first, I'm going to investigate whether Tim Hortons is Canadian.
Oh.
For some reason, recently, Canadians are very interested in buying goods and items that are made in Canada. One of Canada's most famous coffee shop chains is Tim Hortons.
Mm-hmm.
But is it Canadian? Some people say yes. Others say it's American because doesn't Burger King own it or something? Well, others say it's Brazilian.
Oh.
What's going on?
What?
I'll provide a brief overview of Tim Hortons and its history as we explore the answer. The origins. Tim Hortons, or Tim's or Timmy's, as it is now often called, was founded in 1964 by Canadian hockey player Tim Horton and businessman Jim Charade in Hamilton, Ontario. About 45 minutes drive from Toronto, for those of people who are not in Ontario. Initially named Tim Horton Donuts, the chain focused on coffee and donuts, which became its signature offerings.
Mm-hmm.
After Tim Hortons' tragic death in 1974, Ron Joyce, a Nova Scotian-born businessman and franchisee, took over the company and expanded it into a national franchise. Over the years, Tim Hortons introduced iconic items like Timbits, which are bite-sized donuts, in 1976, and diversified its menu to include sandwiches, soups, and breakfast items. I was surprised to learn that the Timbit was older than I was, as I don't remember them always being there when I was a kid, but of course I wouldn't trust a young child's memory, even if that child was me.
I don't know, maybe because I'm from Ottawa and you're from Toronto, but I don't remember Tim Hortons existing at all when I was a kid. I remember it from when I was a teenager.
Interesting.
And
Maybe
it
it was
being more donut focused at the time. But
maybe it was just fewer expansion of the franchises.
Mm-hmm.
These Timbits, sort of like the center of a donut is how we think of them.
Mm-hmm. Donut hole, as you would.
There we go. Yep. So just how many Tim Hortons or Timmy's restaurants are there? Well, as of 2025, Tim Hortons operates over 6,000 locations worldwide, with approximately 3,600 stores in Canada, making it the largest quick-service restaurant chain in the country.
Oh.
The brand has also expanded internationally, with a significant presence in the United States, the Middle East, and Asia. For example, there are over 600 locations in the U.S. and a growing number in countries like China and the Philippines.
I heard there's one under the Great Pyramid of Giza.
To be confirmed. For comparison, there are about 1,500 Starbucks stores in Canada as of 2024.
Mm.
For those who've never been to a Tim Hortons, it's cheaper and less fancy compared to Starbucks.
Absolutely.
For another comparison, as of 2024, there are 1,400 McDonald's restaurants in Canada.
You have numbers for Subway?
I don't. We did that in the previous show, didn't we?
I know we did.
But yes, that means there are way more Tim Hortons than Starbucks and McDonald's put together.
I believe that.
More than 100,000 people are employed in the Canadian stores, and these franchises are owned by 1,500 people. Or I guess probably small corporations. An additional 400 people work in the corporate office, which is headquartered in Toronto. Mm-hmm. So what about the ownership and Canadian identity thing? Well, ownership of the company has changed hands multiple times. In 1995, it was acquired by Wendy's, an American fast food chain.
Huh.
But for various reasons, because it was so profitable being one of them, it was spun off into its own entity in 2006. There was a repatriation of sorts, with Tim Hortons now being on Canada's benchmark stock market indicator, the S&P/TSX Composite Index. In 2014, Tim Hortons merged with Burger King under the parent company Restaurant Brands International, RBI, which is headquartered in Toronto.
This is very odd because there are like Tim Hortons / Wendy's that exist. And these probably were restaurants that opened during the period where it was owned by Wendy's. And now Tim Hortons is owned by a rival burger chain, but these still exist. At least two Wendy's that I go to are inside the same physical building as a Tim Hortons.
Yes. Sometimes they're on the side. Actually, there's one or two stops along the highway too, where there's all three, right? Or maybe there's just one or two there. But yes, there's. You're nicely segueing into a next part. For some details, I'm going to quote Wikipedia. On August 24th, 2014, American fast food chain Burger King announced that it was in negotiations to merge with Tim Hortons, Inc. The proposed $18 billion merger would involve a tax inversion into Canada and a new holding company majority owned by 3G Capital, and the remaining shares in the company held by current Burger King and Tim Hortons shareholders. Fast forwarding a bit, here's another quote. The deal was approved by Minister of Industry James Moore on December 4th, 2014. The two companies agreed to Moore's conditions, requiring that the Burger King and Tim Hortons chains retain separate operations and not combine locations, maintain significant employment levels at the Oakville headquarters, and ensure that Canadians make up at least 50% of Tim Hortons' board of directors. Tim Hortons shareholders approved the merger on December 9th, 2014. The two chains merged under the new parent company, Restaurant Brands International, RBI, that I mentioned just a moment ago, which began trading on December 15th, 2014. So Tim Hortons is owned by Restaurant Brands International, a multinational corporation that also owns Burger King and Popeyes.
But it's not an American multinational.
Well,
Multinational means multiple countries.
We're getting there, yeah. So while RBI is headquartered in Toronto, its largest shareholder is 3G Capital, a Brazilian-American investment firm.
Brazilian.
This is where the idea of Tim's being Brazilian comes from. And now quoting from a CBC article, in 2014, at the time of the takeover, 3G held 47% of the voting power in Restaurant Brands International, but that has slowly decreased over time to 26% as of December 31st, 2024, just as a few months ago. Today, Canadian banks such as Toronto Dominion, Bank of Montreal, National Bank, and Royal Bank, as well as Canadian institutional investors, such as the Canada Pension Plan Investment Board, cumulatively hold a stake comparable to 3G, according to Michael Oliveira, the Director of Communications for Tim Hortons. This mixed ownership structure complicates the question of whether Tim Hortons is Canadian. While its headquarters and a majority of its stores are in Canada, its profits and decision-making are influenced by international stakeholders. So, is Tim Hortons Canadian? Well, it's going to depend how you look at it, as often things are when I do a segment. So there's a cultural significance. Clearly, Tim Hortons is deeply ingrained into the Canadian culture. It's part of our national identity, community gatherings, many events. People are bringing Tim Hortons donuts, one thing to another. And that's a big part of it. And of course, Tim Hortons being a hockey legend as well.
And likewise, the Tim Hortons franchises often support local sports teams and things like that. So it's yeah.
Right. Headquarters and operations, right? The company is headquartered in Toronto. A majority of its stores and employees are based in Canada. As I said, 100,000 Canadians are employed here. And I mentioned the Canadian hockey player. Now, what about against? Well, yes, foreign ownership. Clearly, 3G Capital and other international investors are making decisions, and there's more just a bunch of Canadians. It has expanded beyond Canada, even though the bulk of the stores are in Canada. And corporate practices, well, some people here point to controversies such as labor disputes and changes in menu offerings as a sign of a shift away from its Canadian roots. Like, what does that mean? Like, we're not serving enough maple syrup? so it's like, well, I used to get my back bacon maple syrup burger. I asked Copilot about 3G's corporate practices, and here's the response. It stands out in private equity and investment world due to its unique owner-operator approach. It has a very hands-on management structure. So unlike many private equity firms that act as passive investors, they take an active role in operating the companies they acquire. They often are embedded into management teams, ensuring direct involvement in decision-making. Big focus on cost-cutting, which doesn't sound that surprising for any sort of private equity firm.
Sure.
They might streamline operations, reducing redundancies, and renegotiating supplier contracts. This can be a bit more intense than perhaps a non-private equity firm. They take a longer-term investment horizon. This isn't necessarily good nor bad. They just compare to others. They want to develop talent, management, as well as other things. All I have to say is that some of the menu items might have been pushed because of a certain perspective from a private equity firm. But I don't know if anyone's looked at the Tim Hortons menu and thought, gee, these are private equity offerings versus I just now have more choices that I can choose from. And the donuts and the cookies are pretty much the same.
When there's a change, I assume it's just consumer preference dictated this and cost saving dictated that.
Right.
And they found happy middle, you know?
Yeah, exactly. And so would the private company Tim Hortons, which is going to be focused on cost cutting, be slightly less focused on cost cutting than a private equity firm? Maybe. As we all know, businesses have a fiduciary responsibility to shareholders, and that's going to lead to cost cutting in various ways.
Yeah.
So, is Timmy's Canadian? Well, while Tim Hortons retains strong ties to Canada through its cultural significance and operational base, its ownership and global expansion blur the lines of its national identity. Whether it's Canadian depends on how you define corporate nationality, by ownership, cultural impact, or how and where it operates. What do you think, listeners? And one of those listeners being Adam. What do you think?
It's an interesting question. I recently joined a Facebook group. It's called like Made in Canada or something like that. It's just like people trying to find Canadian alternatives or put highlights on Canadian products and things like this. And they usually talk about food, which is funny because food is like much more labeled than a lot of other products, but still. And there's always these debates like, well, the product like the ingredient comes from the States, but it's packaged in Canada, or it comes from Canada, it's packaged in the States, and there's all sorts of complications. And what a lot of it comes down to is like, who's it owned by, but also like, who does it employ? Like, is there a factory that employs Canadians or whatever? So there's all these issues. So if you're talking about Tim Hortons or almost any sort of franchise, like, okay, who owns it? So ultimately, who's making some profit there? Then there's a franchise. So there's probably Canadians that own a lot of those franchises, at least the ones in Canada. Maybe some are foreign owned, I don't know. And then the people that work there are also employed as Canadians. And okay, where do the products come from? Where do the ingredients come from? So there's just so many facets to this question. So
yes,
at the end of the day, if I spend $1 at Tim Hortons, how much of that money is going into a Canadian pocket? Well, right off, there's taxes and stuff, so a lot of it. But I get the sense that probably based on the story and the picture that you're painting, a lot of it does go into Canadian pockets, even if there is some sort of like ownership governance side that is American/Brazilian.
Yeah, I would come to the same conclusion because you're thinking, well, the store, the people, a lot of the ingredients, they're all going to be Canadian or in Canada or sourced from Canadians and so on. So yes, well, when people say who owns it, I think sometimes if they haven't reflected, they think all of the money goes there. You're like, well, that's not
No.
how things work. Like a small fraction of it, because I don't think the margins on food are that high.
No, I don't think so.
That they also have to offset so many other things, right? So I tend to think, yes, one should be reflective about this. And obviously people are free to support whichever brands or companies or products they want. Mm-hmm. But it starts to get, as you said, quite complicated. If you're thinking like, okay, so if you imagine the different shareholders, maybe there were more Canadian banks that were buying into the overall owners of, is that going to make it more Canadian? Like in a way, but a lot of people don't like the Canadian banks because they're ripping us off. You're like, well, I guess it's better that those bankers versus some other bankers get the money. And it becomes a very interesting thing between nationalism versus classism, I guess, in different ways. Yeah. So I tend to think that, yes, a lot of Canadians are going to be employed by things. And if an individual only buys goods or items that are 100% from that country, they're going to have very few options.
Oh, yeah.
And if everyone did it, there'd be massive unemployment because all, like so many other things, as you said, are integrated. Yeah. It's just not going to work out well. That said, there's a lot of room to maneuver on the margin, and voting with your wallet is one of the best things to do.
Yeah, and even like other downstream things like, okay, well, there's a franchise holder who's renting the building and who owns the building, and they pay a contract to clear the garbage and clear the snow and do the paving in the parking lot, and are those Canadian companies or not? So there's just so many factors. So I would assume that a company that is operated in Canada is going to, for a lot of reasons, use Canadian products, ingredients, and subcontractors and employees and things like this.
Exactly. 3 quick fun facts before we go. If you took the number of Timbits that were sold, technically they say ever eaten, but we know sold. You never know if people eat all of them. They would stretch to the moon and back 5 times.
Wow. So sold in all of history.
Yeah. Like, you're like, is it impressive or is it not? It's hard to know, right? But it seems, the moon's pretty far.
It sounds impressive. I wonder if pound per pound more Timbits or actual donuts are sold. Definitely in length, I think, because if I take like a certain weight of Timbits and I string them, it's going to be longer than stringing a bunch of donuts because the donuts themselves are bigger. They have a bigger circumference.
For people who've never had these, Timbits tend to be denser than donuts, but of course smaller because they are the donut hole.
I think the concept of a donut hole exists outside of...
Yes.
So Americans may be like, oh yeah, donut hole, we have that all the time. I don't know, maybe it's not...
Yes,
maybe it's not as common as I take for granted, but... yeah.
Another one. Lloydminster, Alberta holds the title for the most donuts consumed per capita in Canada.
That's so specific.
And finally, and this is a quiz I asked Adam just before we recorded, originally called Tim Hortons with an apostrophe. The apostrophe was dropped in 1977 due to Quebec's language laws, which prohibited English punctuation in business names. So all those times you heard me say Tim Hortons, it's just Tim Hortons with an S, even though it is based on a guy who started it who was called Tim Horton. Mm-hmm. About 7 years ago, when I went to Cairo to look at those big, lovely pyramids over there, I did not notice a Tim Hortons underneath the Pyramid of Giza. Adam, is there a secret Tim Hortons underneath the Great Pyramid of Giza?
You didn't look hard enough, Darren. You didn't use cutting-edge technology using satellites and vibrating pixels and stuff.
Wow, okay.
That sounds scientific.
I'll have to go back. Oh, I'd like a double-double.
Mm-hmm. The internet has been abuzz about the news about the Great Pyramid of Giza. There seems to be something amazing under it. This relates to claims made by Italian researchers Corrado Malanga, Filippo Biondi, and Armando May. They claim that they found massive objects under the Great Pyramid of Giza extending down over 4,000 feet, which is well over a kilometer.
4,000 feet is pretty far.
It's very far. It's a very bold claim. So for reference, the pyramid itself is less than 500 feet tall. So it's quite a bit deeper than the height of the pyramid.
Quite a bit.
They say that there are 8 large cylindrical shafts with spirals around them, which connect to large cubic structures, or cuboids, one might say.
I should have seen that coming.
I hadn't even written that. I was on the fly there. According to spokesperson Nicole Piccolo, a vast underground city has been discovered beneath the pyramids. Basically, those cubic structures could be an underground city.
Ooh.
Or Tim Hortons, maybe a Wendy's, maybe both. Maybe a Tim
King.
Hortons and a Burger King, yeah. That'd be new. They claim to have used radar pulses to create high-resolution images similar to how sonar radar can be used to map the depths of the ocean. But sonar radar works by having sound waves travel through water and bounce off solid objects like the ocean floor. Based on the speed and sound of the medium, in this case water, you can tell how far an object is and how long it takes to be reflected. Evidently, the pyramids aren't built on water, and they aren't made of water. So,
what about sandworms? Sonar using sandworms.
And thumpers to aggravate them. So we can use ground-penetrating radar to see things underground. This uses high-frequency radio waves, usually polarized waves, emitted into the ground. If it bounces off a buried object, it can be detected. Or if something underground has a different permittivity, it can be detected. This basically means a substance with electric polarizability. It affects an electric field differently, so the ground-penetrating radar reacts differently, and you can kind of see it. How deep this goes depends on many factors. So a lower frequency will go deeper but have a lower resolution. Higher frequencies don't go as deep and have a higher resolution. The Wikipedia page for ground-penetrating radar has a depth for sand and rock to be about 15 meters or 49 feet.
So quick question, is 49 feet less than 4,000 feet?
It's a bit less.
Okay.
It's a bit less, okay. Yes. The researchers mentioned specifically that the shafts go down some 2,130 feet, very specific number, and that they are 33 to 39 feet in diameter. And they claim that these were access points to whatever is under it, those cuboids. Wendy's, Tim Hortons thing. So under the pillar, those are 80-meter cube-shaped structures. And about 4,000 feet under the base of the pyramid, there are more structures.
Oh.
just keeps going.
Wow.
Just keeps going. So that's where the 4,000 comes from. The columns don't go down 4,000.
Okay.
But they say, there's more stuff down there.
Of course, there always is.
Yeah. It's
to the center of the earth.
Tim Hortons all the way. Now, evidently, the team claimed to be using better technology than the ground-penetrating radar referenced on the Wikipedia page. They claim to be using radar pulses, but it isn't clear exactly how this works. There hasn't been any peer review of this research. They claim that the signals were analyzed by sending radar signals from 2 satellites 420 miles above the Earth. So these signals basically went into the pyramids and bounced back to see what's under them.
Impressive.
Yes, and it's not possible at all using like traditional ground penetrating radar techniques. Like it wouldn't even get through the pyramid itself, because basically 49 feet would do about a tenth of the height of that pyramid.
Yeah.
So I don't know exactly what they're claiming to have done, but a few years ago they made similarly outlandish claims. A paper from 2022 claimed to use a technique to make a 3D model of the Great Pyramid of Giza. I downloaded a 46-page paper that they wrote on the topic, and no, I didn't read the whole thing, but I did skim it to get kind of an idea. They're measuring small vibrations of the pyramid, which can, by their own admission, be caused by wind, City of Cairo, and the Nile River. So they measure these vibrations to measure the shape of objects under the pyramids somehow. They isolate a single pixel and track its vibrations. They graph it over time. They throw in a bunch of very complicated math. And they track a pixel not tied to the pyramids. They estimate that that's the vibration caused by Cairo and the Nile, sort of the environmental vibration around. And then they try to calculate the difference and use that to do some sort of 3D modeling of stuff. It's all a bit technical. I don't follow exactly how it works, but I don't really buy it. So that was 2022. So how are they doing these new ones? So the images in the 2022 paper are very similar to the ones in the latest press release. They claim to have used similar techniques than what they did in 2022, only with the benefit of those satellites. So tracking micro vibrations of a single pixel from a satellite 420 miles in the air to determine the shape of structures under that pyramid. It seems a bit far-fetched to me. Now, they say signals were converted into sound waves, enabling them to see through the solid stone. What does that mean? You don't need to convert a signal to sound to see it because you don't see sound. You can use sonar radar to measure distances of a thing. So you're using sound to measure that distance, and then you convert that sound into another signal to visualize it, to see it. You don't convert a radar signal from a radio wave into sound and then to an image. The sound intermediate is completely unnecessary. So to me, that doesn't really make sense.
No, that's like an interesting art project.
Yeah.
Not a scientific discovery method.
Yeah, we converted to sound to see what it looked like. So what do specialists on the topic have to say about this? Here's a quote from one article. Professor Lawrence Conyers, a radar expert at the University of Denver who focuses on archaeology, told DailyMail.com that it is not possible for the technology to penetrate that deeply into the ground, making the idea of an underground city a huge exaggeration. And this seems mostly true, though they claim to have some completely different mechanism, which I'm not totally convinced of. Another expert, Dr. Zahi Hawass, Egypt's former Minister of Antiquities, says that these claims are completely wrong, and says the techniques are not scientifically approved or validated. He says decades of study using Yuan topography, gravimetry, and radar haven't found any signs of such structures. But what even is the plausibility of these structures? Like I said, the original height of the Great Pyramid is 481 feet. So it's actually sunk a little, but that was the height that it was originally built at. The pyramid itself is a wonder of engineering. We don't know exactly how it was built, but it's estimated that it took decades to build. To add onto that technology, to either excavate a kilometer of sand and dirt or build these massive columns into the ground somehow, put a pyramid on top of that, or it kind of defies engineering logic. So this is going down nearly 10 times the height of the pyramid. I'm not one to say that aliens build the pyramids. We would need an explanation that absurd to explain how this megastructure could have been built so long ago. At these depths, it seems possible for modern humans to have built something like this, but it seems a bit complex for something that was built around 4,600 years ago. Some say it was earlier than that, but I think that's sort of the scientific consensus on the age of the pyramid. I don't know all the specifics about the engineering, but in modern days, we do have things that go deeper than that, and we do have buildings that are taller than that. There's also speculation about what this is. So there are people who think that the pyramids are part of a big power plant, stuff like that. I don't personally find that very plausible, but those are some of the more outlandish ideas about the true secrets of the pyramid. Corrado Malanga, the researcher behind this paper, has other interests. Amongst other things, he thinks that aliens are extra-dimensional parasites who hijack human souls to use them as batteries to achieve immortality. I don't want to be engaging in an ad hominem attack, but he has other views that are maybe not totally evidence-based.
Mm-hmm.
Is there a megastructure, massive columns, a lost city, or maybe parts of an elaborate power plant located under the Great Pyramid of Giza? I remain unconvinced. The techniques that are supposedly used to measure this have not been well proven or confirmed by others in the field. Though it is not my expertise, they don't seem that plausible. The sheer magnitude of these structures, given when they would have been built, and the lack of previous evidence of their existence means that we should require strong evidence to believe that this is actually the case. And I haven't seen evidence that I find to be that strong.
Yes, correct. I mean, at its face, it's ridiculous unless there's something overwhelming. And there has not yet been anything overwhelming.
Yeah.
It's just so weird. It's interesting how pyramids really do captivate people for all sorts of alternative explanations. It's almost like people just don't want to believe a bunch of humans did it.
Well, you've seen them. I assume it's much more awe-inspiring than like looking at a tall skyscraper.
Well, it is, but tall skyscrapers are taller.
Yes, they are.
Right? So people don't realize, like, pyramids are very impressive, but they're also not that tall if you live in a modern city.
So I was thinking of this when I was driving around the other day, and I was looking at some tall buildings and wondering, like, which ones of these are actually taller than the pyramids? Turns out, unless you're in a really big city, most of them are not. But still, like, we have buildings much taller than that. Right?
Yes, if one sort of thinks there's 10 to 15 feet per story, and the pyramid, the main Giza one, is 450-ish feet high, well, that's a lot. That's a lot, right? And you're like minimum 30 stories. And again, a lot of places don't have that. Now, if you're in a place like Bangkok, like I was recently, or New York or something, like, oh, there's many, right? Of course, the width, the pyramidal shape even of the pyramids, one might say. I think in the past, by the way, a current image of the pyramids is like a bunch of step-like design on the outside because they look like a bunch of blocks. But in the past, it was smooth. It really was pyramidal as like a triangular shape. All that to say is the pyramids are very impressive, but if you've gone to see skyscrapers, they're much taller. Most people also don't realize that the pyramids are very close to Cairo. They're not far off in the desert. So the photo that people take is usually from like one angle where there's just desert behind them.
So you take it from the angle where Cairo's behind you, basically.
Yeah, in a way, like, from many angles, Cairo's not behind you, right? It's mainly just one. Yeah. But yeah, there's another angle where you're thinking like, okay, I just left the pyramids and the Sphinx is there, and like a 10 to 15 minute walk, you could just go have like a snack somewhere at a restaurant in the city.
Tim Hortons, Wendy's,
yeah,
whatever.
Exactly, Tim Hortons. Exactly. Burger King, Wendy's, all of them. Yeah, halal. Yes. All to say, I got distracted. Thank you, Adam. Humans built the pyramids. That's the best explanation we have. And it seems a bit insulting. I won't quite say racist, but a bit insulting that a bunch of people just couldn't build it. Like, come on, have some more faith or credibility in your fellow human that could do something so amazing and give them the credit for it.
Yeah, I mean, I've heard that argument. I don't believe that everyone who disbelieves that the pyramids were built by humans are being racist, but that is, that is an interpretation of it. And that may be behind some of the thought. But yeah, I think you just see something impressive and a part of you just kind of disbelieves it, right? And sometimes I just marvel at like just modern buildings and things like that are so impressive.
Yes.
Just the engineering behind it. Just like even compared to like a house is kind of impressive. And then if you compare a building, a skyscraper to a house, it's such another level of sophistication.
It's amazing. It's amazing.
Yeah.
When I was in Bangkok, there was the tallest skyscraper there, which is the tallest in Thailand. It's about 1,000 feet up you can go.
Wow.
And from there, you're looking at other skyscrapers. Like, how do they build that? Right. And so I know loosely, of course, how they use cranes and whatnot. But even I'm amazed, especially because many in Bangkok, they're very thin. They're very narrow. So it seems even more impressive somehow. Yeah. That you can build something like that. So yeah, I'm very much impressed by current modern buildings, but I don't think it's aliens.
Sorry, aliens.
Sorry. Yeah. To any of our alien listeners, please write in and disabuse us of our false beliefs here.
Love to hear from you. Give us a 5-star review on iTunes.
And my book. Thanks for joining us once again, listeners. I talked to you about whether Tim Hortons is Canadian, and yeah, kinda, mostly, somewhat, depending on your perspective. And Adam looked at where there are mysterious megastructures underneath the pyramids, and the answer is probably not. Until next time, think better, tack better.
Peace out, cuboids.
Not the cuboids underneath the pyramids.
For show notes or to discuss this episode, visit our Facebook page and website at trcpodcast.com. For general inquiries or to send a topic or parody suggestion, email info@trcpodcast.com. Help support the show by leaving a review on iTunes and liking us on Facebook. Follow us on Twitter at TRC_podcast.
Outtakes.
It's those tunnels that Will Smith takes.
No, we're cutting that. Because also I don't get the reference. From which movie?
There was this conspiracy that there's secret tunnels under LA.
Oh.
And the person who was exposing it claimed to work at a Starbucks.
Okay.
And his proof was Will Smith. And then he like rattled off Will Smith's order. And Will Smith's watching this video. And he's like, I have to sit in traffic like everybody else. I wish I could be in a super tunnel. According to spokesperson Nicole Piccolo from Dragon Ball Z, not from Dragon Ball Z. It's also the name of a flute you uncultured.
Philistine.
Some sort of Brazilian fast food store.
Stop. You got greedy. Don't fly too close to the sun, Adam. See, you're what, 40 seconds into your segment?
It's the Brazilian
Remember,
word
after this, you got to do your full segment after. So,
what's the Portuguese word for Wendy? The name Wendy. Okay. If Christina was on, she could tell us.
What's the Portuguese name for Wendy? Simply Wendy.
Simply Wendy?
It's often used direct translate.
It's unfortunate. Even though, like, we're much higher up here on the floor. Sorry, I don't want to dox you.
No, that's not a good ending.